Ernest Miller Hemingway was an American author and journalist. He was born on July 21st, 1899 in Oak Park, Illinois, where he was raised. He died on July 2nd, 1961 in Ketchum, Idaho. Hemingway's economical and understated style had a strong influence on 20th century fiction, while his life of adventure and his public image influenced later generations. Hemingway produced most of his work between the mid-1920s and the mid-1950s. Oh, and he won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1954. He published 7 novels, 6 short story collections, and 2 nonfiction works. 3 novels, 4 collections of short stories, and 3 nonfiction works were published posthumously. That means after he died. Before he was a big game hunter, before he was a deep-sea fisherman, Ernest Hemingway was a craftsman who would rise very early in the morning and write. His best stories are masterpieces of the modern era, and his prose style is one of the most influential of the 20th century. Hemingway never wrote a treatise on the art of writing fiction. He did, however, leave behind a great many passages in letters, articles, and books with opinions and advice on writing. Some of the best of those were assembled in 1984 by Larry W. Phillips into a book, Ernest Hemingway, on Writing. Some students have selected 7 of their favorite quotations from the book and placed them, along with some popular commentary, in this video. We hope you will all, writers and readers alike, find them fascinating. Let's get started. Tip number 1. To get started, write 1 true sentence. Hemingway had a simple trick for overcoming writer's block, and he shared it during a memorable passage from his memoir, A Movable Feast. Here is Jose to share what Hemingway said.
Sometimes when I was starting a new story and I could not get it going, I would sit down by the fire and squeeze the peels of little oranges into the edge of the flames and just watch the sputter of blue that they made. And I would stand up and look out over the roofs of Paris, and I would think to myself, do not worry. You have written before, and you will write again. All you have to do is write 1 true sentence. Write the truest sentence that you know. So finally I would write my 1 true sentence and go from there. It was easy then because I had this 1 true sentence that I knew or I had seen or I had heard someone say. And I found that if I had begun to write elaborately or like someone introducing or presenting something, I could just cut away that scrollwork or ornament and throw it out and start again with this first true, simple, declarative sentence that I had written.
Tip number 2. Always stop for the day, while you still know what will happen next. There is a difference between stopping and foundering. To make steady progress, having a daily word count quota was far less important to Hemingway than making sure that he never emptied the well of his imagination. Rebecca will share what Hemingway wrote in an October 1935 article in Esquire, Monologue to the Maestro, a High Seas Letter. In this excerpt, Hemingway offers advice to young writers.
The best way is always to stop when you're going good and when you know what's going to happen next. If you do this every day when you're writing a novel, you'll never be stuck. That's the most valuable thing I can tell you, so try and remember it.
Tip number 3. Never think about the story when you're not working. Building on his previous advice, Hemingway says never to think about a story you are working on before you begin again the next day. That way, your subconscious will work on it all the time, he writes in the Esquire piece. But if you think about it consciously or worry about it, you will kill it, and your brain will be tired before you start. He goes into more detail in A Movable Feast. Why don't we let Savannah share exactly what he said?
When I was writing, it was necessary for me to read after I had written. If you keep thinking about it, you would lose the thing you were writing before you could go on with it the next day. It was necessary to get exercise, to be tired in the body, and it was very good to love whom you loved. That was better than anything. But afterwards, when you were empty, it was necessary to read in order not to think or worry about your work until you could do it again. I learned already never to empty the well of my writing, but always to stop when there was still something there in the deep part of the well, and let it refill at night from the springs that fed it.
Tip number 4. When it's time to work again, always start by reading what you've written so far. To maintain continuity, Hemingway made a habit of reading over what he had already written before going further. Tom will share what Hemingway wrote in the aforementioned 1935 Esquire article.
The best way is to read it all from the start every day, correcting as you go along. Then go on from where you stopped the day before. When it gets so long that you can't do this every day, read back 2 or 3 chapters each day. Then each week, read it all from the start. And that is how you make it all of one piece.
Tip number 5. Don't describe an emotion, make it. Close observation of life is critical to good writing, says Hemingway. The key is to not only watch and listen closely to external events, but to also notice any emotions stirred in you by the events and then trace them back and identify precisely what it was that caused the emotion. If you can identify the concrete action or sensation that caused the emotion and present it accurately and fully rounded in your story, your readers should feel the same emotion. In Death in the Afternoon, Hemingway writes about his early struggle to master this. I'll let Sophia share exactly what he said.
I was trying to write then, and I found the greatest difficulty, aside from knowing truly what you really felt, rather than what you were supposed to feel or had been taught to feel, was to put what really happened into action. What the actual things were which produced the emotion you had experienced. In writing for a newspaper, you told what happened, and with one trick or another, you communicated the emotion aided by an element of timelines, which gives a certain emotion to any account to something that has happened on that day. But the real thing, the sequence of motion and fact which creates the emotion, which could be as valid in a year or 10 years, or with luck and, if stated purely enough, always, was beyond me, and I was working very hard to get it.
Tip number 6. Use a pencil. Hemingway often used a typewriter when composing letters or magazine pieces, but for serious work, he preferred a pencil. Scott will share what Hemingway wrote in the Monologue to the Maestro article from Esquire, which shows signs of having been written on a typewriter.
When you start to write, you get all the kick and the reader gets none. So you might as well use a typewriter, because it's that much easier, and you get that much more out of it. But as you learn to write, your job is to convey everything, every sensation, sight, feeling, place, and emotion to the reader. To do this, you have to work over what you write. And if you write with a pencil, you get 3 different sights to see if the reader is getting what you want him to. The first, when you read it over. The second, when it's typed, you get another chance to improve it. And the third, in the proof. Writing it first in pencil gives you 1/3 more chance to work over what you write. And that's .333, which is a damn good average for a hitter. It also keeps it fluid longer, so it's easier to better it.
Tip number 7. Be brief. Hemingway was contemptuous of writers who, as he put it, never learned how to say no to a typewriter. Nolani will tell you what he said in a 1945 letter to his editor, Maxwell Perkins.
It wasn't by accident that the Gettysburg Address was so short. The laws of prose writing are as immutable as the laws of flight, of mathematics, of physics.
So that's it. Now you know Hemingway's secrets to writing. Be brief. Use a pencil. Don't describe an emotion. Make it. When it's time to work again, always start by reading what you've written so far. Never think about the story when you're not working. Always stop for the day while you still know what will happen next. And to get started, Write one true sentence. As you may have discovered from this video, Hemingway saw writing as a process, and now you know some of that process that he went through. Hopefully, this video will help your next idea turn into the next great American novel. And who knows, maybe you're the next Hemingway.